My name is Jurius Doctor, and this is another class on getting around an Eve. This class is specifically going to cover fleets and basic fleet maneuvers and communication. I'm joined by a couple of my courtmates today for this class just to cover some of the fundamentals. We're presently undocked in space, just sitting on a friendly Fortizar here, as you can see. So, initial fleet commands and things that people need to know. When you are traveling in a fleet, you have a fleet commander, or FC, who will be giving commands to the fleet. Typical other roles that you'll engage with will be the fleet scout. This is the person who is finding the way for you or finding targets. And you will have typically Logi and E-War as well. So logistics people whose job it is to repair you, and E-War pilots whose job it is to confuse the targeting systems of enemy ships so that they are not as effective at dealing damage to you. There's other strategies as well, but basically if any of these people are talking, shut the hell up. There are certain commands that FCs will give and that others in those roles will give, which is basically a polite way of them communicating to you to shut the hell up. And those are check, check, or break, break. If you hear somebody say check, check, it means this person has something important they need to communicate over comms. Please stop talking. If they say break, break, it means I have something to communicate to the fleet that could result in fleet deaths if you don't stop talking. So if you hear somebody say break, break, stop talking immediately. Clear comms. If somebody says combat comms, that is a polite way of saying, guys, stop chatter. We need to keep this communications clear so we can hear what people are saying. So clear comms is kind of like a polite reminder to not, clutter up the comms with just random talk about whatever the latest Drake video is or whatever it is you want to talk about. And if you listen to Drake, you're a bad anyways. But if somebody says check, check, it's their way of saying, guys, cut it out. I have something to say. Another thing to note is that in a lot of corporations, depending on who you've joined, some more than others have very, very strict rules around their fleet comm. It is not uncommon in large groups like PL or Horde or Goon Swarm for people to have very, very, very specific command privileges around comms in fleets. You simply do not talk on those fleet channels. Typically the only people you should be hearing speak are the FC, the scouts, and occasionally the Logi. And more than that, in a lot of cases you'll find that in more organized fleets, especially the big block level flights, that fleets have been divided in TeamSpeak or Mumble or whatever communication channel they're using into sub-channels with whisper keys set up so that when you're talking, you're only talking to the people who are in your immediate group. So Logi people can only hear other Logi people, the FC and the scout speaking. Everyone can hear the FC, everyone can hear the scouts, but you might be only able to hear and talk to members in your own squad. This is not uncommon, as it is a way to keep comms clear, but even then, individual squad commanders might shout to your channel, everybody stop talking, I can't hear the FC. Another good point to note is that in organized fleets, especially ones with larger fleet count numbers and more organized doctrines, individual squad commanders, wing commanders, and fleet commanders will often set up dedicated in-game chats where most of your communication will happen with your squad members through text in the in-game chat windows. There's also the fleet chat, which the moment you join a new fleet will automatically appear, just like the incursion channels that only show up when you're in incursion space. So only when you're in a fleet will the fleet channel show up, and in that fleet channel, anything you type in there or link will only be available to your fleet members. Fleet is often where destinations are linked, where fittings are shared, where waypoints are added for you to be able to navigate, and where questions are answered when everybody's in that hurry up and wait mode. Another part of clear communications comes in the types of commands that your FC will give you. Any command that is given that is intended for the entire fleet will be given 3 times. The reason for this is that, as is the case with video games these days, especially MMOs that are played throughout the world, is there are a number of different accents and dialects of English that you will hear. English is sort of the lingua franca, the language of trade used by people playing EVE. And while there are entire corporations dedicated to Russian players or German players or Japanese or Chinese players, the common understanding is that everybody speaks English if they want to communicate with everyone else. That said, with so many accents out there, sometimes it's hard to understand the people when they're giving you a command. So we always repeat fleet commands 3 times. 1, for the sake of being able to be heard. 2nd, for the ability to be heard clearly and understood. And 3rd, for the ability to confirm that everyone has heard the command. So when you hear a command repeated 3 times, by the 3rd instance, at the latest, you should be in the middle of carrying out that command. So if the command is to warp, and you've been given an align to object to warp to, when the FC says warp, 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 you should have heard them, the command should be clear, and you should be in the process of going to warp. That's the order. There are 3 basic commands that are given 3 times in this way. They are align, so you'll hear align, align, align. There is warp, 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 warp. And there is jump, 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 jump. If the FC doesn't give those commands 3 times, in big fleets, especially coordinated fleets where landing someplace at the same time is critical, feel free to ignore the FC. Most of the time, if the FC doesn't say jump, do not jump. In fact, there's a number of fleets and corporations out there that are named around the seriousness of this activity. Groups like Did He Say Jump? Because entire fleets have whelped when people lemminged through a gate. Lemminged is meaning they jumped through before the FC said to jump. That have lemminged through and let the enemy know they were there, and then they just got dropped on. So, screwing up fleet because you weren't listening to the FC's commands can cause your destruction and the destruction of your fleet mates, and I guarantee they will not be happy with you if that happens. The other commands that will typically be given in a fleet are free burn or make best speed, meaning you will travel by yourself at your best speed as fast as you can from where you are to this location that's been given to you. Once you get there, you will stop on the in gate. You will not go to the out gate unless the FC says otherwise. So free burn from here to X location. If they say free burn to Jeddah, it means you're going to warp gate to gate, or from gate inbound to pin to gate as safely as possible at max speed until you arrive at the system that's been named, in this case Jeddah. There's the command anchor. Anchor means to choose the anchor's ship, so your fleet mate, and to set keep at range, typically 500 or 1,000 meters, and keep that person at range. The anchor is then responsible for moving the fleet around, so they will navigate around in space and your ship will automatically follow them. The FC will call for cycle props. So cycling props means to turn your propulsion module on and let it cycle for a certain amount of time. If the FC says, okay, everybody give me 3 prop cycles, that means turn your propulsion module on, let it cycle 3 times and turn it off. You're going to want to turn it off halfway through the 3rd cycle so that it turns off by itself at the end of that cycle. FCs can also target things. An example of this is if you look at your fleet tab in overview, if you've got your overview set up to a standard overview, you can target something as the FC and you can tag it. Tagging means that a number or a letter or a target reticle will appear next to that target in the overview in the tag column, which is just to the right of where the icons are that indicate what type of target it is. You'll notice that if you're in an IBIS, like Bart is in this example, if you mouse over the icon, it will tell you pilot is in your fleet and this pilot is in a Corvette. So if I target him, it's going to say I can't because he's tethered up, he's invulnerable. So it's not going to let me target him. However, with him selected in my overview, I can tag him. I can also mark him as target. So now he has a small target reticle that's appeared above his head, and he's listed as target number 1. So FCs, or a designated target caller in the fleet, can be responsible for tagging targets and tagging individuals for alpha strike in a fleet. Another thing that tends to happen is fleet warps. So in order to fleet warp, you need to be moving in the same direction at max speed as your fleet commander. So in this case, I'm going to give a sample align. Okay, align to the FQQ gate, align FQQ. So what I've done here is I've aligned myself to the FQQ gate. I've broadcast an align to the FQQ. And what this does when I create a broadcast as the FC is that in the history tab of the fleet window, under the broadcast history filter, at 19:31 and 15 seconds, Juris Doctor broadcast align Stargate FQQ. So I call align, 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 align FQQ. My fleet mates, in this case Bart, should be aligned to the FQQ gate. And then I can right click in space, choose the gate ping
User
above
left your
that
channel,
gate, and I can choose to warp the wing or the fleet to that location. Now in this case, it's not giving me that option because I'm not actually in the squad commander or fleet commander position. So I would have to move myself through free move to that location. And I'm going to do that now. There we go. And to make this easier, I'm just going to move Bart into my squad. Actually, Bart, can you move yourself to squad 7, please?
Yep.
There we go. So
Done.
now that I'm in a leadership position, he's in my squad, I can now set a location and I can warp the squad to within that location. Now my ship warps faster than his does, so he's arriving a little bit behind me. But we've both arrived at this bookmark location directly above this gate. Now gate pins or gate bookmarks like this one are used to get around bubbles. A drag bubble is a warp disruption bubble that occurs between two objects. So if the gate is, let's say, 20 or 30 AU from the celestial that you're warping from, and somebody puts a bubble down within 500 kilometers of that gate in a straight line between the gate and the place you're coming from, you'll get dragged into that bubble and you'll come out of warp before you get to the gate. And these are often used as a trap to catch people as they're going from gate to gate. These drag bubbles, as they're called, can also occur behind the gate. So as long as that bubble's within 500 kilometers of the gate, even if it's behind the gate, it will pull you past the gate and into the bubble. And often you'll find people waiting for you. So using a gate pin gets you off of the primary vector, the path between the gate and the other celestial, and it puts you up at the location around that bubble so that you can warp to the bookmark and then down to the gate to get around it. Other purposes for bookmarks like these is to set up a perch or to set up an observation point above a gate so that you can see what is coming through that system.
User joined your channel.
Hey, whatever you guys are doing, be super careful.
Locals?
50-man interceptor fleet. I just ran into it, and it is now following me home. So
Roger that. We're in Fortikey, so we'll be fine.
yeah, just make sure. Okay, I don't want to see death to these nerds again.
Thank you.
User left your channel.
You'll probably edit that out.
Yeah, that's all good. I might just leave it in for the lulls. So another reason for a perch is basically being able to watch what's coming through Cloaking. And to give you an example of that, right now Bart is 4,373 meters from me, which means he is more than 2,000 meters away, and I am able to cloak. So to him, it will appear that I have simply vanished off of his overview, but I am still here. Now I'm going to navigate up to the pin, so I'm going to approach that location. And once I get within a certain distance of Bart, I will be forced to uncloak because my cloaking systems only work if there's no collidable objects nearby in space. So Bart, go ahead and approach the bookmark.
Approaching.
So what will happen is that once Bart comes within a certain distance of me, it forces my cloak system to go offline. And that is what will happen when you see somebody cloak up after coming through a gate, is you want to immediately try to burn towards where you last saw them and try to get ships within a certain distance of them, so it forces their cloak to come offline. In this case, I'm just in a small mining frigate. Another thing that will typically happen in fleets, in addition to having you pre-align to a location, is that the FC may do what's called a ninja warp. A ninja warp is where they put you into a squad warp, wing warp, or fleet warp, where they don't tell you where you're going. So here's a ninja warp. So what will happen is immediately his ship and mine will face the right direction and then go to warp, taking us in this case to a bookmark near one of the celestials or one of the collidable objects in space that's been previously saved. Now FCs won't always tell you they're going to do a ninja warp, they'll just do it. But this is a good example of a ninja warp. The idea behind fleet warps is to get everybody on grid at the same location at the same time. And the purpose of that is so that you're able to get damage application on field as quickly as possible. There's also typically countdowns to alpha strikes. What that means is that everybody engages their offensive modules at exactly the same time, so that that damage is applied evenly across the entire fleet. So the first volley will do damage all at the same time, and the objective is basically to overwhelm the defenses of the defending ship and basically knock it out completely. Here's another ninja warp. So in this case, I've selected a random moon, and I've chosen that location and said, hey, here we're going over here, and the entire fleet will immediately initiate warp, align to that location, and go there. This is particularly handy if you know you're being followed and you want to try and confuse your attackers or get them off of you, is you'll just pick random celestials, in this case a random
User
node,
joined your channel.
and you'll warp there to get away. There's also safe logging, which is once you are able to get to a safe or to a random location, such as this moon, you're going to set yourself to log off, which will start a 30-second timer. If you don't have any limited engagement timers or weapons timers, you should immediately go into a 30-second countdown to safe log off, at which point your client will close and your character will be safely removed from space. which is something that you will sometimes have to do if you're being followed. There's also the creation of safes, which is something that you will sometimes do in a fleet, where the individual pilots will head off to a certain celestial, and they'll keep moving from one random celestial to another, and the rest of the fleet will warp to them. And what happens when you warp to a fleet member that is moving is that you will warp to where they were when you went into your warp tunnel. You will not land where they are, you will land where they were. This is called a rolling safe. So somebody like the scout will just start bouncing around system.
User left your channel.
You're going to warp to where they were and land on field with them at that point. If they ever stop moving, you'll actually land on grid with them, but if not, you're going to keep landing where they were, creating more and more safe locations midpoint between different celestials. The purpose of this is to make it so that it makes it very, very hard for the people who are following you or trying to kill you to combat probe down your location and get to you. And last but not least, there is the creation of deep safes. And I'll give you an example of that now by going to another random location. In this case, I'm going to pick a moon that's really far away. So I'm going to go to a random moon here, moon 77, and I'm going to warp to within 100 of it. And I'm just going to do this by myself. I'm going to leave Bart behind. And I'm going to create an inline safe by putting down a bookmark in between where I was and where I was going. Now, the bookmark gets placed when you hit submit, not when you open the bookmark window. So I've created a bookmark called safe. I'm going to warp back to it. So this is an inline safe. This is a safe between two celestials. In this case, between two moons. Now, when I get to that safe, I'm going to pick a random direction away from those celestials, away from those two planets or those two celestial bodies that I'm in between. And you can get a better idea of where that is if you open your directional or probe scan and you open your solar system map. So you can see where you are by centering on yourself. And you'll see where that is if you open your D-scan, because it'll create a big blue sphere around where you're located. So right now I can see I'm near planet 7, and I want to burn off in a direction away from everybody else. So what I might want to do is head off in this sort of direction over here. If you really want to get an idea of where best to turn, is change the angle of your D-scan so that it creates a cone, and then move your camera in space so the cone faces away from the planets that you're at. And then what you do is you just double click in space in the direction that you want to head, turn your prop mod on and accelerate to full speed, and just leave it running. And if you're in a ship that can cloak, even better. But basically you want to start burning off in a random direction, burning meaning that you've got your prop mod turned on, and you're going to head off in that direction until you're several hundred kilometers off of the vector in between the two planets, and you're going to drop another bookmark there, and that'll be your deep safe. So it's an unaligned safe. You start by creating a safe between two celestials, and then you start burning off of it in a direction that is not going to put you between two other celestials. And the purpose for that is to make you harder to find when they're warping around. So that's the end of this. That's really all the commands I really have to show you for basic fleet introduction. Is there any questions?
Nope.
Okay. There is one last thing I should show you, actually. In Fleet, if you right-click on my name, and in Fleet, say Add Squad Members to Watch List or Add Member to Watch List, you'll create a watch list, which is a secondary window that pops open with the names of the people in your squad. You can use those names to navigate to those people in space. So you can right-click on one of those names, and you can say warp to, and it'll put you directly on that person. The watch list also gives you the ability to see what that person's health level is presently at, so that if you're responsible for repping them, you can keep an eye on their health level. And that should cover everything. Covered watch lists, covered orientation, movement. Yeah, I think we're good. Thanks very much for attending this short class.